There are no statues of the Grey Knights. Throughout the Imperium, you will find no cenotaphs, no plaques, no obelisks or mausoleums to record their sacrifice. Only deep within their sanctum on Titan will you find any mention of their fallen battle brothers. To mankind at large, the Grey Knights simply do not exist, yet it is they who must bear the supreme burden in the war against chaos. As the chamber militant of the Ordo Malleus, the blade against chaos, the Grey Knights must often bear the unthinkable and commit the unspeakable to keep mankind safe from the predations of chaos, even if that means perpetrating the occasional atrocity. These are not acts of wanton cruelty, but necessary evils in the face of a far greater threat. They are the grim choices made in the name of survival, the hard decisions that must be made when the alternative is the damnation of entire systems. The very nature of the enemy demands it. It falls on us then to tell the tales of the vaunted Grey Knights and bring their heroism into the light. Though countless imperial citizens have perished at their hands, their sacrifice is always in service of a higher cause, for they compete for the very highest of stakes, the survival of mankind. The story of the fall of Inquisitor Saffor Sengir of the Ordo Malleus is one such tale. In the year 941 M41, a relentless pursuit was underway. Inquisitor Sengir, a stalwart defender of the Imperium, was on a mission. Her objective was singular and unyielding. She had learned of a powerful greater demon, a lord of change, known as Ixtharganix, that possessed the power of foresight. It was the Inquisitor's resolute belief that this power of foresight could be harnessed, and in doing so, she could better protect the Imperium. This pursuit, born from the noblest of intentions, gradually morphed into an obsession that spanned decades. Sengir's journey took her across the vast expanse of the Imperium. From the towering spires of terror to the farthest reaches of the eastern fringe, she left no stone unturned. Her quest led her through ancient ruins, forgotten vaults, and alien worlds. She was searching for relics and artifacts tied to the enigmatic Lord of Change. Each piece was a fragment of a larger puzzle, a breadcrumb on the trail to Ixtharganix. Unbeknownst to her, the demon had been aware of her long before she had even drawn her first breath. Ixtharganix, a master of manipulation and foresight, had foreseen her relentless pursuit and laid a trap for the unsuspecting Inquisitor. Her search led her to a derelict alien spacecraft, drifting aimlessly through the void of space. Within its cold, lifeless hull, she discovered the skeletal remains of a long-dead creature, a former host of Ixtharganix. The bones radiated with an otherworldly energy, a clear sign of their demonic past. Sengir believed she could use these remains to summon and bind the Lord of Change, to bend its power to the will of the Imperium. However, Ixtharganix had anticipated her plan. Posing as the Plague Father, the demon had lured another of its kind, a great, unclean one, known as Lurgon, with a promise of entry into the mortal realm. Using dark rituals and sorcery, Ixtharganix bound Lurgon to the Whisperer, the skeletal remains of his former host. As Sengir prepared to summon Ixtharganix, she unknowingly triggered the trap. Instead of the Lord of Change, she found herself face to face with the bloated, pestilent form of Lurgon. The wards she had prepared, designed to imprison Ixtharganix, were ineffective against the greater demon of Nurgle. Lurgon's will was too strong. Unable to materialize, he instead possessed Sengir's body. She dropped to her knees laughing as her acolytes, performing the ritual, began to bleed pus from their eyes and ears. Lurgon raged at being tricked by Ixtharganix and swore revenge. He attempted to unleash a plague upon Sengir, but Ixtharganix's influence had altered his power. Instead of a plague of contagion, it became a plague of madness. Within an hour, the entire crew of the Inquisitor's ship, the Pilgrim, was infected. They descended into violent insanity, clawing at their own eyes or gnawing at their skin. The once bustling ship became a floating tomb. filled with the echoes of mad laughter and screams of agony. Months later, only a handful remained alive aboard the drifting Pilgrim. The ship, now a ghostly husk, drifted aimlessly in the Decimalus system. Lurgon, using Sengir's ciphers, voxed Decimalus Prime for aid. His message was a siren's call, luring the unsuspecting to their doom. Within a week, the madness had spread to every planet in the system. The plague of madness, born from a demon's rage and an inquisitor's obsession, consumed all in its path. Within a month, Lurgon had the Administratum Lords and the entire system completely under his thrall. Inquisitor Saffor Sengir's quest for the power of foresight had led to an unforeseen catastrophe. Her obsession had not only failed to fortify the Imperium, but had also unleashed a new, insidious threat. Meanwhile, in the hallowed chambers of the Greyknights' fortress monastery on Titan, the Prognosticars, revered psychers gifted with the ability to glimpse into the warp, were in a state of heightened alert. Their minds, usually as calm as still water, were now rippling with psychic turbulence. The warp was in turmoil, and the Prognosticars sensed a malevolent force like an ever-widening tear in reality. Beneath the stony gaze of Janus's statue, Grand Master Kaldordraigo laid out his plan for quelling the incursion on Decimalus to the assembled Council of Grand Masters. Recognizing the seriousness of the threat, he called for the entire Grey Knights chapter to be deployed at once. The chamber was filled with an air of urgency, as the Prognosticars had rarely been so unanimous in their warnings, although not all agreed with Draigo's proposed plan. Grandmaster Valdar Oricon, the head of the Grey Knights Librarius, took the floor to present his findings. Utilizing a combination of psychic divination and the Emperor's Tarot, Oricon revealed that the demon lord of change, Ixtharganix, was the malevolent force behind the plague. This demon had long eluded the Grey Knights, and the council agreed that this opportunity could not be missed. The demon's involvement indicated that the plague was not merely a biological threat, but multidimensional, combining elements of sorcery from multiple chaos gods. After intense deliberation, Draigo made the fateful decision to deploy the 3rd, 5th, and 8th Brotherhoods to the Decimalus system. This was a significant commitment of resources and left the Citadel of Titan perilously undefended, with only a small detachment of purifiers left to guard the Chamber of Purity and a handful of battle brothers to man the defenses. However, the council agreed that the risk was necessary. The demon lord Ixtharganix was a foe of such malevolence and power that his continued existence posed an unacceptable threat to the Imperium at large. Oricon had also discerned the connection of Inquisitor Sengir and the secret of the Whisperer's bones. The Brotherhoods began immediate preparations for war. The apothecaries prepared vials of sacred unguents and psychic wards, while the chaplains led the knights in prayers and rituals to fortify their spirits for the battle ahead. As the Grey Knights prepared to depart, the weight of their mission hung heavily on their minds. They were not just going to battle a plague or even a demon. They were going to confront a being whose malevolence had the power to corrupt an entire star system, and perhaps even more. With their preparations complete, the Grey Knights boarded their strike cruisers and set course for the Decimalus system, fully aware that they were heading into a confrontation that could have far-reaching consequences for the Imperium and for themselves. Crossing 50,000 light-years, in but a few days, the Grey Knights' fleet emerged from the warp into the Decimalus system, where they were met with immediate resistance. The orbital defense platforms of Decimalus, once a bulwark against external threats, had been corrupted and were now teeming with daemons. These platforms unleashed a barrage of fire upon the Grey Knights' ships, making it clear that the demons had fortified their positions well. Supreme Grandmaster Kaldordraigo quickly assessed the situation and realized that the Void Glaive, a massive space station serving as the linchpin of Decimalus orbital defenses, had to be neutralized for the main assault to proceed. Drago assigned Brother Captain Stern and the elite warriors of the Third Brotherhood the perilous task of boarding and capturing the Void Glaive. Stern, a veteran of countless battles against the forces of chaos, understood the gravity of his mission. His Terminators, clad in their indomitable tactical dreadnought armor, prepared for teleportation. They knew that what awaited them was not just enemy fire, but a maelstrom of psychic energy and demonic malevolence. The greyknights activated their teleportarium, and in a flash of cerulean light, Stern and his Terminators found themselves on the command deck of the Void Glaive. The scene that greeted them was one of utter horror. The crew had been possessed, their bodies and minds twisted into grotesque forms. Demons of various kinds, furies, pink horrors and nurglings, roamed the corridors, cackling and screeching in dark glee. Stern and his Terminators wasted no time. With orders to prevent damage to the Void Glaive, storm bolters were not an option. Force halberds swinging, they engaged the possessed crew and demons in brutal close-quarters combat. Every swing of their weapons was guided by years of training and an unyielding faith in the Emperor. The battle was fierce, with the Grey Knights having to adapt to the ever-changing tactics of the demons and possessed crew who were empowered by the malevolent will of Ixtharganix. As Brother Captain Stern and his Terminators fought their way through the Void Glaive, they were set upon by an unexpected and horrifying terror, a soul grinder. This monstrosity had been somehow transported onto the station, likely through dark rituals that tore open a portal through the warp. Its presence there was an abomination, a violation of the natural order. The Terminators launched themselves at the soul grinder, Stern lunging forward to attack its massive mechanical legs. The soul grinder seemed oblivious to the attack, swatting aside his halberd as it continued to assault his brothers. Trapped beneath the part demon, part mechanical beast, Stern opened fire on the command deck's vista plates in sheer desperation. The soul grinder was sucked into the blackness of the void as the armor glass exploded. Stern was dragged along the deck with the monster and almost lost to the infinity of space. Only the quick thinking of his brothers saved him as they hauled him free. After what seemed like an eternity, Stern and his remaining warriors managed to secure the command deck. They immediately set about purging the Void Glaive systems, expelling the demonic infestation through a combination of psychic rituals and targeted demolitions. With the Void Glaive neutralized, the path was clear for the main Grey Knights force to begin their assault on the surface of Decimalus. Deep within his throne room, in the Administratum Nexus Spire on the surface of Decimalus, Lurgon surveyed the carnage aboard the Void Glaive on picked recorders through the glazed eyes of Inquisitor Sengir. With a wet, throaty laugh, he drooled in anticipation, both for the coming battle with the Grey Knights and more so for his revenge upon Ixtharganix. And so, calling to the warp, he summoned his forces. With the Void Glaive neutralized, the Grey Knights prepared for their ground assault on Decimalus. Supreme Grandmaster Kaldordraigo led the 5th and 8th Brotherhoods in a daring drop-pod assault, targeting key strategic locations that had been identified by orbital scans. As the drop pods pierced the atmosphere, they were met with anti-aircraft fire from corrupted Imperial defense systems. Despite the resistance, the Grey Knights successfully landed and immediately set out to secure their objectives. As they advanced, the Grey Knights received a distress signal from a pocket of resistance, led by the Adepta Sororitas of the Order of the Vermilion Hand. Canoness Lunaria and her sisters had been holding out against the plague-infected populace and demonic forces in a fortified cathedral. Realizing the strategic and moral importance of aiding these brave warriors, Drago redirected his forces to assist. Canoness Lunaria and her sisters had been fighting a desperate battle. Cut off from reinforcements and facing overwhelming odds, they had turned their cathedral into a fortress. Despite their dire situation, their faith in the Emperor remained unshakable. Even so, from 1,000 sisters they were now reduced to less than 200. To preserve ammunition, they had been forced to use their bolt guns as crude cudgels to beat back the infected population. As the Grey Knights approached the cathedral, they found it besieged by hordes of plague zombies and lesser demons. Draigo ordered his paladins to form a spearhead, cutting a path through the enemy to reach the sisters. When they finally broke through, the relief and gratitude on the faces of the Adepta Sororitas were palpable. When the Grey Knights had cleared the last of the demons from the cathedral, Kaldor sought out the Canoness. As Canoness Lunaria removed her helm and wiped her sweat-slick hair from her face, Draigo saluted her with his Titan's sword. After a quick tactical meeting between Draigo and Canoness Lunaria, a plan was formulated. The Grey Knights would lead a frontal assault against the enemy lines, while the sisters would provide fire support and flank the enemy positions. The Seraphim would take to the skies, targeting enemy commanders and heavy weapon emplacements. With the region secured, the Grey Knights could now call in heavy support. Storm Ravens dropped from orbit, bringing with them Land Raiders and Dreadnoughts. Draigo himself embarked upon the lead Land Raider Crusader. The Eighth Brotherhood rumbled towards the Nexus Spire, supported by the Rhinos of the Adepta Sororitas. Lurgon, who was now completely aware of the intruders, called forth his hordes to wipe them out. The followers of Nurgle roused themselves from every nook and cranny of the terrible metropolis. All sorts of monsters, including plague-bearers, Nurglings, and diseased civilians, lumbered, slithered, and staggered their way to the defences of the spire. Draigo observed the increasingly dense population of bloatflies in the air and the steady swelling of weeping, pustulant forms in the small alleyways. He ordered the tank to plough through them, while its weaponry was spewing carnage into the crowd. The machine spirit of the Land Raider grumbled ravenously as it continued to operate the vehicle, which proceeded without stopping to smash demonic flesh into the ground and drive the creatures away. Draigo could see the Battle Sisters' rhinos tearing through the demons on a parallel road as they flashed by in the alleyways. Adepta Sororitas clung to the sides and rooftops of their transports, firing their bolters into the fray with precision accuracy. A pus-splattered herald emerged from the swarm, flanked by 7 monstrous beasts of Nurgle. The Land Raider drew to a standstill as it approached the beasts, blessed steel battling profane, rotten flesh. The herald raced forward, ramming a rusted blade into the tank's hull as it battled to extricate itself. Armor that should have been resistant to las cannons rusted and collapsed in front of the blade, and the tank's engines erupted in a blazing cloud, even as the assault ramp opened. The explosion blew Draigo clear of the ramp, sending him plummeting to the ground yards away. Grey Knights fought their way out of the wreck, but as they did so, they were dragged down by hordes of demons. Draigo rose to his feet, unsheathing the Titan sword, and began clearing a way to his brethren. Draigo, unfazed, continued to fight demons with his blade, fists, and psychic fire. Rotting fingers gripped at Draigo's sword arm as a rusty blade chopped at the back of his armor. A plague-bearer's decaying visage spat toxic mucus at Draigo's faceplate, and swarms of Nurglings gnawed at the seals of his armor. The Supreme Grandmaster felt himself slowly sinking into the fetid depths of the warp-spawn's spawning pool, while his brothers became little more than glittering silver specks. Then he began to hear the distant melody of a hymn. At first, Draigo thought it was a vox echo, but as it intensified, he realized it was a choir singing the Emperor's praises. The Sisters of Battle unleashed a barrage of blessed bolter fire, shredding the demon horde and driving the cursed beasts back. The remaining sisters, led by the bloodied and battered Canoness Lunaria, who was enshrouded in a golden glow as they utilized flamers and melter guns at close range to drive back the demons of Nurgle, charged into the ruin. Draigo approached his brothers as the horde retreated before the fresh onslaught. However, the Battle Sisters only afforded Draigo a brief respite, and the warp spawn were already massing for another attack. Draigo spoke briefly to Lunaria, realizing that the Nexus Spire concealed the true enemy. The Canoness nodded her assent, knowing that her sisters would gladly sacrifice themselves to buy the Grey Knights some time. As the Adepta Sororitas made their final stand, Drago left them behind and continued on towards the Spire. The formidable defenses of the Nexus prevented a direct assault against the Spire, so Drago dispatched the Fifth Brotherhood to disable the power supply of the Polar City. Throughout the ruins, Battle Brothers fought their way into demon-infested reactors and conduit junctions, destroying them one by one and disabling the enormous lance turrets that guarded the Nexus. With the weapons silenced, the Grey Knights could concentrate on breaching the demonic defenses, protecting the fortress's gate. 5 squads of Grey Knight Terminators, flanked by 2 Nemesis Dreadknights and commanded by Kaldordraigo, ascended the vast ramp leading to the Nexus Gate in close formation. The Battle Brothers, whose helms were surrounded by a ring of psychic fire, combined their power into a single, silent pulsation and directed it at their commander. As the spell's focal point, Drago channeled the psychic energies into a fiery projectile that consumed everything it touched. Those demons before the gate that did not fall to the Dreadknights' cannons and swords were washed away by the fire, their physical forms disintegrating with wet pops. The gates of the Nexus exploded open, unleashing a torrent of nurglings and unimaginable filth. The Dreadknights waded into the spire, their weapons roaring as they cleared a path through the noxious tide. The Grey Knights fought their way doggedly through the spire, Lurgon hurling innumerable minions into their path. Drago finally stood before the throne room's entrance. Despite their vehement objections, the Supreme Grand Master ordered his brothers to remain there. Drago understood that the only way to entice Ixtharganix into battle was to present him with an adversary he could not resist. Kaldordraigo entered Lurgon's throne room. Scattered around were the bones of the Whisperer. At last, Drago locked eyes with Sengir, the great Unclean One's desiccated demon host. Warp magic flickered across the room, illuminating the bones of the Whisperer as Ixtharganix's shrill laughter reverberated throughout the room. The Sengir host stumbled towards the manifesting Lord of Change, the demon Prince of Nurgle, rampaging behind its eyes. Drago held his ground as he awaited the manifestation of the demon, content to let the Nurgle Prince attempt to exact revenge. Carried by an ethereal wind, the bones coalesced into the colossal avian form of the Whisperer. Lurgon attempted to attack, but the frailty of the Sengir host's flesh he wore was not up to the task. Ixtharganix lashed out at Lurgon by channeling his magic through the bones, his ancient demonic claws ripping into the putrid flesh of the former Inquisitor. The host collapsed to the ground, with its intestines spilling out in an unnatural flood. Now that Lurgon had been defeated, the animated bones diverted their attention to Drago, the shadowy form of Ixtharganix forming around them. The demons sealed Drago off from his brothers with a gesture, isolating him from them, before fully manifesting and issuing a challenge to the Supreme Grand Master. Drago activated his teleport Homer. Stern and 30 Grey Knight Terminators materialized in the throne room of the Spire. The demon burned with undiluted anger. The mortal who led the warriors appeared as a black shroud in the demon's vision, his fate having already been seized by another and rendering him somehow invisible to his own demonic vision. As the Grey Knights charged, Ixtharganix had little time to contemplate the deception. Abandoning the skeletal host, the Lord of Change withdrew back into the warp, but not before severing the psychic ties that bound Lurgon to the destroyed Sengir host. Lurgon crawled out of the Sengir host in a burst of flesh, assuming his true, horrifying form. Drago now focused fully on the Nurgle demon, initiating the assault with a punishing strike from the Titan's ward. Lurgon battled viciously, shattering ceramite and bone with his enormous claws and drowning his foes in great gouts of rotting matter. Nonetheless, he was no match for the combined strength of Kaldordraigo and Brother Captain Stern. Stern hurled the demon back into the warp and cut off its ability to return after uttering the banishing words. The pestilence across the Decimala system ended with the banishment of the greater demons. Destitute and broken humans awoke from their nightmare without recollection of the preceding events, on every continent and beyond. The Grey Knights returned to Titan, carrying the bones of the Whisperer, while Draigo vowed that the next time he encountered the Lord of Change, there would be no possibility of escape.